Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Today my guest is Jason Hewlett. Before he comes on, a couple of announcements. Coming March 11th, 12th, and 13th, we got Forbidden Knowledge News Con. We're going to have 8 presenters. It's going to be online with a Rokfin premium membership. If you've already got that membership, you're already in. You get the entire conference for only $10. Just sign up through that link in the description or go to rokfin.com/FKN+. You're going to get not only the conference, you get all our premium content and all the content from every creator on Rokfin. New episodes are always available free on Rokfin, as well as Odysee and all podcast platforms. Our website, forbiddenknowledgenews, is also the home of the Forbidden Knowledge Network, where we feature other podcasts from our wonderful community. Podcasts like Raised by Giants with Ryder Lee, Inception with Gloria Canning, Understanding Propaganda with Cory Hughes, Quantum Guide Show with Karen Holton, Going Down the Rabbit Hole with Laura Wells, and Day Zero with myself, Cory Hughes, Charlie Robinson, XQ 420, Lindsay Sharman, and a whole slew of wonderful rotating hosts. Coming later today will be the first episode of The Ancient Gift with October Hollum. And definitely be sure to follow us on Facebook, both of our pages. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter. All those links are in the description. Finally, guys, if you're reaching that gray hair stage in life, like myself, check out C60 Purple Power. C60 may be the most powerful antioxidant known to man. It has helped me with inflammation, energy, well-being. The list goes on, and you can get C60 for your pets, so your pets can feel great too. But check it out for yourself. Do your own research. Click the link in the description. You're going to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Today I want to welcome back to the show Jason Hewlett. He is a journalist, broadcaster, and podcaster with a degree in filmmaking and film studies. His lifelong interest in the paranormal led him to join Vancouver Paranormal Society in 2017, where he was a lead investigator and society director until 2020, when he and a colleague, Peter Wren, launched the Canadian Paranormal Foundation. He is the writer, director, and co-creator of the award-winning paranormal reality series We Want to Believe and the narrator of the UFO show, both which are on the Paranormal Network. Jason, welcome back. How you doing?
I'm doing good, my man. How about yourself?
I'm excellent, and it is great to have you back on. Like we were saying before, you've been a busy man. We have a lot to discuss. You got a lot going on, man. You got a new reality web series. You're narrating shows, writing and co-writing books, managing the Paranormal Network on YouTube channel. So we got a lot to talk about, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. And it's been a really long time since you've been. I think it's like almost 2 years now.
I would say, yeah.
Yeah, so let's start with a little bit about you since it's been so long. Let the audience know a little bit about your background and what really got you interested in these topics and ultimately led you down the path you're on.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. Like a lot of people who are interested in this topic, it always starts, as a kid, something happens to you that's hard to explain and etc. And it kind of launches this interest. So I can't remember exactly which one we talked about, but it was just a couple, like when I was really young, 5, I was in the back of my mom's hatchback car we were picking up a buddy of mine for a sleepover. She had gone to get him and was talking to the mom, and I was sitting in the back. The vehicle, I remember looking out the back hatchback, empty street. And then suddenly this face appeared in front of me in the window, like this grotesque mongoloidish looking face. It was there, and I saw it, and it freaked me out, and then it disappeared, and then that's when I hit the floor because it scared the crap out of me. And then I heard footsteps coming up, and it was my friend, and I asked him, well, did you see someone hanging around the back of the car? He's like, no, it's an empty street. Mom came up, I asked her the same thing, and she says, no, it was probably just your imagination. But I know it wasn't my imagination because that was like a good 44 years ago, and I remember it like clear as a bell. And that was kind of really the first thing I had happen that kind of launched this interest. And that's when I kind of also started to feel like I was kind of feeling things, like noticing just certain vibes in places, like, creepy stuff. Like I get a creeped out feeling in certain environments or at certain times of the day, like at night, feeling like I just wasn't alone. or something had happened there. And as I got older, I just started looking more and more into it. Fan of shows like, the original In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, Arthur C. Clarke's Mysterious World. If there was a Bigfoot book somewhere, I picked it up and read it or bought it or took it out of the library, ghosts and all that. And it just went on from there. And it was always an interest, even though it became a side interest. I even abandoned it as an interest when I went, I have a film degree. I went to film school in the 90s and I learned how everything you need to know about making film and stuff like that, editing, writing, directing. I became a journalist for 10 years. I was a newspaper crime reporter for 10 years. So I have a journalism degree. So big at research, but then it just came back, in kind of the 2000s, started doing my own investigation solo. And then in 2017, I joined Vancouver Paranormal Society as an investigator. And that's where I met Peter Wren, who I co-author, the 2 books I've written with, and we do the web show, We Want to Believe, plus another show, Hunting the Haunted. Mm-hmm. And that's where I really learned the craft of being a paranormal, like a professional paranormal investigator, working with him. And we've since gone on and left Vancouver Paranormal because we both live in the interior of British Columbia and formed our own group, which is Canadian Paranormal Foundation, and conduct our own investigations here in the interior. And We Want to Believe, which is our web series, is kind of an offshoot of that. When we're allowed to go into a place and film, we do the documentary. And if not, we just conduct our regular investigation. So that's kind of the nutshell that's kind of brought me to where I am now, like a real Cliff's Note version of who I am and what I've done. Very
awesome,
limited.
Man. Now, I know being in this community for the length of time I have, going on 5-6 years now, my understanding of paranormal phenomena, UFOs, all this stuff has greatly changed. I have a different perspective on a lot of things than I did when I first started looking at this stuff, and it's probably going to keep changing and changing as I go along. What would you say are some of the most profound things for you that you might have a different understanding about now than when you first started looking at this stuff?
I'd say one of the biggest, and you're right, it's always changing. And I think it's going to be something that always evolves because I think it's an always evolving thing. That would be the first bit. Like when I first started, I just thought, there's monsters like a Bigfoot or a Loch Ness monster. And then there's ghosts, which are the spirit of dead people. And that's basically was the way that I looked at it. And UFOs came from outer space like that. You know what I mean? That's kind of how I viewed it. I don't think it's that simple now. And everything that I've experienced has led me to believe that it is more of an interconnected thing, and that the paranormal, what we call the paranormal, we only call it that because we don't understand it. I think it's a very natural phenomena. I think it's been with us as people since we first showed up in the universe on this planet. And I think we just haven't, and I think it's always been interacting with us, and we just haven't sort of figured it out. And I think there was a time as people that we were more in tune with it. And as we became kind of more civilized and created more of a society and a culture around us and became distracted by technology and having to work jobs and the system that we've created, we've lost touch with that. And that there's some of us who are becoming more in tune because we're starting to experience, see it, and accept it, and kind of let it in. And I think that to me is the most profound difference. I don't think it's so simple that whatever I'm experiencing when I go and investigate a haunting at someone's house is just the spirit of a dead person. I think there's a lot more going on there than that. And that's when you could get into multiverse theory and all the ultra terrestrials and all this other stuff, which we could talk about for hours.
Yeah, for sure.
Try to unravel what that is.
And I completely agree with that. And I think that all this has a lot of profound connections that we can't understand. We're trying to, but you're right. I think that our ancient ancestors had a much better understanding of what this stuff is and probably interacted with it on a daily basis. They probably had much more spiritual contact and just a greater understanding of the nature of reality. And I've come to believe that whatever this hidden realm is, that it's all around us all the time. We just can't tune into the frequency. We can't see it with our eyes. It's just this world of life that's all around us at all times, hidden. And sometimes we get a glimpse of it, whether like you said, if we're more sensitive to it, or maybe these entities that exist in these realms can choose when to kind of pop in and show themselves. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree completely. And that's something that it's taken me a while to accept that, but I think you're right. I think it's always here. I can't remember if we mentioned it the last time. There's a book called The Occult written by Colin Wilson. And he spent years in researching the occult and the paranormal. Like he was a non-believer and he went into research to try to book. He was contracted to do it. And what he came back with was the belief that, yeah, oh no, it's been with us forever. And he called it Faculty X. And it's an ability that we have to tap into that. And when we were the hunter-gatherers roaming the plains and had to survive day to day and avoid, being attacked by saber-toothed tigers, we relied on it to survive. And we relied on like spirit guides and, being much more spiritual to survive. And it's only as, like I said earlier, we started kind of developing civilized, coming together and not first, like just in little groups, then tribes, then creating whole cities, that we kind of lost sight of that. And I mean, you could argue that as we developed our own religions and all this stuff, that we just kind of put it aside and started almost like ostracizing it and ignoring it to suit kind of the belief systems that we came up with. But I mean, it's here. And I think if it wants to let us know that it's here, it will. If it doesn't want to, it won't. You know what I mean? No matter how hard you look.
Yes.
And I think it's been changing with us as time has gone on in the way that it presents itself to us, if that makes any sense at all. Like as we've evolved and developed, it's evolving and developing with us so that when it does show itself, we can interpret it in some way, shape, or form. And John Keel talked a lot about that.
Yes, and I've had quite a few discussions about this possibility of like maybe this is some kind of grand trickster intelligence that exists and maybe shapeshifts into different things. Maybe it could appear as an alien or a UFO, and then if it wants us to see a ghost or some kind of other strange energy or paranormal entity, cryptid, whatever, it could shift into that. I mean, I explored that possibility as well. There's so many layers. It's like unpeeling a never-ending onion.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because you can say that it's that, or you could just say that what we're running into, if you want to believe in like a multiverse concept, that stuff like Sasquatch just exists in a different verse. And for occasionally that verse connects with ours and it shows up. That's why you always hear about Bigfoot prints in the snow in someone's backyard and it kind of goes halfway across the yard and then it just disappears. Like the tracks just disappear in the snow, like they stop. Like Skinwalker Ranch is a big example of where all this weird phenomenon happens, and the scientists that investigate there even have seen portals open up and stuff come through and close. But on our cameras, you just see like an orange ball. It doesn't make any sense, right? So there's so much woo stuff that doesn't feel so woo anymore when you start looking at the body of like what can pass for evidence in this field building up to suggest it's something way more complicated than just a ghost or a monster or an alien.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find that from the time you started kind of really getting into and actually working with the paranormal field, from then when you started till now, that people are more open-minded to it and maybe looking at it a little bit more openly?
I think so. I think it's becoming way more accepted. Like I was a journalist from like 2003 to 2014. And had I brought it up and my interest up at any point during that time, my career would have been over because I'd have had no credibility. But now you just got to look around, even in popular culture. Like, I mean, the Travel Channel isn't about traveling. It's about ghost hunting. There's a bazillion ghost hunting shows out there. YouTube is becoming, there's so many shows where people are like, going into places and filming. I think it's very much acceptable. I think what's happened the last 2 years with this pandemic has made people take a good hard look at life, what's important to them. And they've had a chance to stop. And reports of hauntings went up. Reports of UFO sightings went up. Because I think people finally just stopped being busy. They had to. And they started paying attention to what's actually going on around them. And they're seeing that this is a very common everyday thing that is all around us. So I think now you and I couldn't have this discussion on a radio or YouTube or podcast, but now you can, because people want to hear about it and they want to know more about it. And they want to have these conversations about what this is and what it means to us in our day-to-day lives, how important I think it's really important to kind of unlocking the whole point of why we're here and what happens once we leave this plane of existence and go on to somewhere else.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see the shift that's going on kind of even in the mainstream with what's, supposedly this disclosure that's coming out from our media and the Pentagon, and I don't trust any of it. I think it's all BS, and I think a lot of what we're seeing in the sky is our own stuff, but that's a whole different show. But it is interesting to see the reaction of the populace to this stuff, and I think that people are becoming more open, especially because of the past couple of years, a lot of what we considered conspiracy has kind of come true. I think a lot of people have realized that they've been deceived in many ways by a lot of institutions. And on top of what you said, you know, being alone in your home, they start looking at things. They're like, well, hey, this isn't really what they told me. And I think that's going on like a global scale right now, you know?
Hugely. And I think even like we can even take it back to disclosure. Like it's interesting that they said in the summer of 2000, not long after the pandemic hit, that next summer we'll have information on this, and everybody just bought it. Like there was a time they wouldn't have even considered talking about we're going to disclose what UFOs are or what we know about it, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of got to wonder about that. And when you set a date that far in advance, you got to think it's going to be BS of some sort because they already obviously knew about it. You know what I mean? Like they give you a timeline and information started slowly coming out. Was that misdirection? I don't know. Possibly, but it's the government trying to keep some kind of present some semblance of control over something that I don't think they can handle.
Yeah,
at all,
and with their track
right?
record, I just don't trust what they have to say, you know.
Well, and even like the growing distrust in the last 2 years about all these institutions that they did trust, government, the media, right? Which again is a whole other different conversation. But I think it just shows people are now more readily thinking for themselves.
Yes.
And realizing how much they have been lied to and how much media is being controlled and how you can't always trust what you're being told by mainstream media anymore or the government.
Yes, for
There's an agenda there.
Yeah, we live in like super interesting times. There's a lot happening, and like I said earlier in the show, you got a lot going on. I want to talk a little bit about some of the things you got going, like We Want to Believe. For those that aren't familiar, tell us a little bit about this web series.
Well, this web series started, it was supposed to be a podcast, which we were going to do back in late 2019, early 2020. Because I have with my broadcasting background and radio background, I'd done a pop culture show for like 11 years, which was more about movies and stuff like that. So it seemed like a logical offshoot to take these investigations and kind of put them on as a podcast, because Peter had been approached, because he's been doing this for 30 years, approached numerous times to do TV shows and Netflix shows, paranormal reality shows. But he always said no, because he knows that there was always an agenda. Like you got to worry about advertising dollars. You got to produce a ghost every week, you know, blah, blah, blah. And it just doesn't work that way. So we figured a podcast was a good way to kind of present paranormal investigations realistically. And while we were kind of recording our first podcast, which we did at a haunted location, we were recording the investigation. I did a Facebook Live video, just promoting what we were doing. And I have a friend of mine named John Fallon, who was with Joe Blow Media. They're the biggest movie entertainment site on the internet. And he watched the video and he kind of messaged me and said he had talked to Barrett Garabedian, who's the guy that runs the site, and showed him the video. And they thought, why do a podcast? Why not film everything and put it up on YouTube? Because they were moving big into YouTube. So I went back and talked to Peter and he agreed to it, as long as we could do it in a way that, again, presented it realistically. We figured YouTube, you could do that. There's not all these pressure for advertising dollars, etc. So we shot the first we went back to the same location a month later and filmed it right before the pandemic hit. We were locked down. So we kind of filmed everything, put it all together. And we had a couple months to piece together a 4-part series called We Want to Believe, which then became the ongoing series. So what we do is we go into different locations that we're investigating, that we're invited into. We film everything that happens and we present it as it happened. We don't stage anything. We don't try to create false scares or false drama, etc. We provide a commentary and we leave it up to the viewer to decide what happened. And we've been doing it for, even yesterday, I realized cameras first rolled 2 years ago yesterday. So we've been doing it for 2 years. We've started covering other topics. Like we've done Bigfoot hunts and filmed those episodes. We've tackled the missing 411, phenomenon. We've done residential locations. We've done historic sites. And that's just, we just put it out there for people to watch and enjoy. We've got great feedback from people, both within the paranormal investigative community, who appreciate that it's a realistic approach and not what you watch like on Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures or anything like that.
Oh yeah.
We won Best Documentary Web Series at Midwest Weird Fest last year. We're in an official selection again this year. And it really started like the books and everything else that kind of came along afterwards. So it's like funny how one little Facebook Live video took this and just made us run with it, which has been quite an adventure so far.
For sure. And how do you feel about what's happening with our entertainment industry, and things that are shifting from Hollywood entertainment. People want to go into theaters, and then eventually having this stuff in their home on DVD. But now it's like everything is online, especially after the pandemic and everything that happened. It's going to continue to shift online. We don't really have this kind of model for entertainment industry anymore. Everything's really shifting to like entertainment on YouTube and podcasting and listening to independent content creators. And I think that is like amazing. These people that, people like yourself, people like myself are having amazing opportunities right now to do stuff like this, documentaries, podcasts, and be very successful in it. Because I think right now people want authenticity and real stuff. They're tired of the fake BS,
I agree completely. And it's one of those, because I did film school. I went in 94 when you still had to shoot everything on film because video sucked. Like you could just tell it looked horrible. And it cost like $8,000 to shoot, 6 minutes of footage. So you couldn't do it. You could not do it. Like you were beholden to these bigger companies, even as an indie filmmaker. But yeah, now with the technology, I mean, on the one hand, I think it's great because you're right. People like you and I can do this and create good content and put it out there, and it's on demand and people can have access to it. And you're also right, because I think people are tired of the Hollywood machine. Like, and the Hollywood machine's never going to go away. Like the fact that a movie like Spider-Man No Way Home could make, $750 million exclusively in a theater says there's still a demand for that kind of content in a theater. But for everything else, like the indie productions, etc., they're just moving online. And I think that's wonderful that you can watch all this stuff online. I think the only problem with it, and it always happens in this kind of thing, is because everyone can do it. Everyone is doing it. And I think the good stuff gets lost in the shuffle of the junk that's being put out there, which isn't very good at all.
Yes, it does have. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right. There's a lot of stuff. Everyone and their dog can make, anything. So I think you got to hunt for the good stuff. But when you find the good stuff, it's a real reward. You get good indie content that doesn't have any other agenda behind it. Like I think Small Town Monsters, like they make amazing documentaries, like Seth Breedlove and company, and they get the recognition they deserve. They're like the big gun of the indie, especially in the indie paranormal documentary field. They do amazing work, and I think they're kind of a benchmark to follow. But there's also, if you go on Amazon Prime, there's lots of paranormal shows out there that just suck. Like,
yes, I was talking.
They're horrible
about that
versions of the popular stuff that you'd find on like the Travel Channel, right? And I think. But I think what'll happen is they'll eventually get weeded out, and you'll get left with some really good stuff. And that's what we try to do at the Paranormal Network. We try to do really good, high quality shows that you could almost watch on a History Channel, and enjoy that. And people have responded really well in terms of them being very well acclaimed, and there's a loyal audience that watches them. So I think, which is great. So I hope that kind of answers your question. But this is the way it is now. And all the pandemic did was speed that process up. It was going there. Like the theater model, it doesn't work for everything. People my age, I'm in my late 40s. We don't want to go to the movies unless it's for a Star Wars or a Marvel movie. Like otherwise we'd prefer to watch a really good drama at home or a comedy at home, or watch, because it costs more than $100 to take for a full family to go to the theater. We'd rather watch a family film at home.
Yeah, right on. Are you concerned at all about some of the censorship that we're seeing on independent platforms? I know it's mainly for people who are kind of going against some of the narratives that are being put forth right now, but it's also across the board, kind of, because we're seeing. Yesterday, I saw an announcement that on Facebook they're going to start censoring astrology and tarot information. And I'm
really?
like, why? Yes. And it just seems like they're trying to kind of get rid of all this woo-woo and even spiritual stuff online and available to the public. Just, I don't know. That's what I see from it. I don't know any other reason why they'd be doing things like this. But also there are certain kind of woo things that have been censored on YouTube and certain other platforms whenever you get down to it, because there's some connections to other things that happen. But are you concerned that that there may be some censorship aspects to what you're doing?
Yeah, I think now that you mentioned, I mean, that does make you wonder, and it makes you wonder why. And the only thing I could think of as to why is because, well, I mean, like Facebook with Zuckerberg, he's a big businessman, right? Corporate, definitely more right-leaning, I think, probably more traditional. And that might worry him in the sense that he's trying to help his other big media partners who are worried, like, because you said, we just talked about, people can go create their own stuff. Well, if people go create their own stuff and it's popular, they're not going to watch the other stuff because they're tired of the other stuff. We've figured out that it's all BS and that it's all advertising driven, etc. So the only reason I could see him doing that is to put a clamp on the indie filmmaker, which there's a big clamp on the indie producers right now, because the big media giants don't want to lose their audience.
Right.
I think that's all it comes down to. I think that's the only thing I can think of, other than when it comes to tarot and stuff, is just, maybe more of a religious right doctrine that doesn't want people to look at all this other possibilities out there. They want you to stick with going to church and that kind of thing. That's the only thing. And no disrespect to people who do go to church. I'm someone who believes we're all entitled to our own opinion. We're all entitled to our own belief system. And as long as someone's not cramming theirs down my throat, I don't try to I never try to cram my belief system down someone else's throat. We can all get along and not agree.
Right on. Yeah, if everybody kind of went by that, we'd live in a much better place. It's just insane, some of the things that are happening right now. But, we got to kind of wade our way through it and just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. But I think overall good things are happening, like we just talked about, for people doing their own thing in this community. Let's get into some of the craziest investigations, some that really stick out in your mind that you've featured on the show.
Ooh, well, there's one place that the episode was called The Doll House. It was a 2-parter, and it's a place called Bailey House here in the interior of British Columbia. It's a historic site that's been long rumored to be haunted. And as an investigative team, when we were there with Vancouver Paranormal, we, over the years, had a number of things happen at different parts of the property. So we went back to film an episode there after having really good luck, thinking we would have good luck. And we did. We were down in the cellar, the basement, basically. And we decided to set up a laser grid system, which is exactly what it sounds like. It shoots this laser light pattern across the walls that you can see in a grid form. And anything that cuts and cross of the light will show up as a shadow. And for whatever reason, and we've had this work in other investigations, it seems to work if there is a spirit there. Like the spirit breaks the laser light so you could see its shadow. So with cameras on, like we turn the laser grid on, we turn the lights off, cameras are rolling, and there's a shadow, and it looks like you'd almost see like this against the wall. And so we're like, wow, look at that. That's weird. And so we turn the light on, and there's nothing causing this. No one's standing in front of it. There's nothing to obstruct it to cause this. So we turn the light off, and that shadow's still there. And then, we did that a couple times. And as the light went off the next time, it just went away. Like something had been standing there and moved away. But we had it all on film. Like you can see it in the episode where we have it on film. And I thought that was pretty wild. Yeah. Because we'd had, things swear at us through a spirit box and on EVPs there before. We had a toy hammer go flying off a shelf. Like it just kind of fit in with the model of what we'd been experiencing. So that was one thing that I thought was pretty incredible. And then during our Bigfoot hunt, we had 2 things happen that I thought was neat. One of them, we did 3 separate hunts that became a body of 4 episodes. And on one of them, we followed a guy named Mike who had been going to this remote lake in the middle of nowhere, 55 kilometers up a mountain to this lake where there's hardly anybody ever there. And he goes and hunts and fishes there. And over the span of 20 years, he would go almost every year and he'd go out fishing on the lake. And he'd get to this one end of the lake and he'd start hearing 3 knocks on the trees, like a 1, 2, 3, as he got closer. And that would persist until he would move away from that spot. And so we figured we'd go up there and we'd get in the boat and we'd go take a look at it. And so, because the boat was only so big, there was myself, Mike, who was our guide, and another guy, Marcus, who was our cameraman. We left Sean on the beach with the shotgun just in case something showed up. And we were going towards this spot and we got nothing. There's no knocks. We even tried going on shore and communicating, doing our own knocks. Nothing. And it was the first time Mike would even go on shore on that area. He would never land, because he'd hear the knocks spooked him so bad. And you get that creeped out vibe that people have reported with Sasquatch kind of thing. So as we're going back, we get close enough, Sean starts yelling and he's like, "Did you hear the knocks?" And I'm like, "No, that was us. We were doing it." He says, No. He says, "I heard those knocks." He goes, "Before you got on shore, there were 3 knocks, but it was coming from over this way." So it was on another part of the lake off to his right. It's almost kitty corner where we were. And he actually managed to record them on his cell phone and get the knocks. So that was kind of neat that we got these wood knocks. And the last one we went out, we were going to the spot. And we're trying a whole bunch of different experiments. Like we tried the baby crying, shutting off all lights and having a recording of a baby crying in the woods. We brought a guy who could do his own knocks and squatch calls and everything. But what we did is we brought the spirit box and we decided to turn it on just in case. And the first thing, as soon as we powered that puppy up, we got someone saying, "Help me." And this mumbling that went on the whole time, like a background mumbling. It was really weird. And so we started kind of doing a session asking, and we got the name Robert coming through. So we hypothesized, like, well, was this? It was the same voice that said, "Help me." So did something happen to a guy named Robert in the woods around where we were doing our Bigfoot hunt? Which that to me was pretty wild. And we've gone back since. In the episode part 2, we did part 1 of The Woods came out last month, and it's following up on that investigation to find out who Robert was and what happened to him. Part 2 comes out Monday. I don't want to spoil kind of what we sort of have happened there, but we think we may have found out who Robert is and what might have happened to him and why he would have been, his spirit could be wandering the woods, if it is indeed his spirit.
Oh, wow. Well, since you mentioned Bigfoot, let's get your take on what you think is going on with this thing. I did a show just the other day with Tim Renner. We were talking about Bigfoot, and there's some extreme high strangeness associated with this. As he said, some of the testimonies he's heard is these things are seen going in and out of portals with UFO activity near them. Some of them are seen like carrying glowing orbs and just disappearing whenever you try and go look at it. But there's also this very physical aspect to some of the sightings as well, where they just seem to be some kind of hominid that, leaves behind fur and footprints and maybe even some scat. I don't know. But it's definitely high strangeness. And, you look at areas like Skinwalker Ranch and the Meadow and all these other places of high strangeness, they have like Bigfoot activity along with ghosts and UFOs. So it's like, what the hell's going on there?
Well, I think it's like we talked about kind of earlier in the show. I think there's a lot more than it being just a flesh and blood creature. Like I prefer to try to think of it as that, because I hate trying to explain an unknown with another unknown.
Yeah.
But you're right. And I'm doing some research right now to a case in British Columbia we hope to go and investigate in the spring, where there's a lot more going on. And if you talk to the indigenous people, they don't view Sasquatch at all as a flesh and blood creature. It's another spirit of the forest, right? And it's very much a spiritual, supernatural being. And I mean, I've read enough accounts that kind of definitely lean that way. And that's where again, like you come into multiverse theory. Like I think that's where we're looking at something just beyond kind of what we're used to doing. And I think, and I've talked to many cryptozoologists who see it as a flesh and blood creature. I think because that's kind of the way they have to approach it. And I think you kind of have to start with that until you have something to determine that it's not. But I had as a kid, because we had a cabin out in Sasquatch territory, out of the Shuswap. And I mean, I'd wander around those woods all the time. And I'd have moments out there where I was out there by myself. And there was times like, 25 years ago, it was pretty remote, wasn't as developed, where I'd be in the cabin and I'd be planning to spend the night and everything's fine. And then I would get this intense feeling of dread, and it would come out of nowhere and it would just build up, where the hairs are literally up on the back of my neck. And it's like, I have to go right now. And it's the most terrified I've ever felt. And I would leave. And it's happened to me twice over the many years we'd be out there. And I've since read that there's this belief in the Sasquatch research community now where they can do this thing called nudging. And if they want you to go away, people have reported this feeling of that intense fear and they just leave. You just leave. And if there's also had moments where like suddenly they feel this intense joy and everything's great and they're very euphoric. And I think, that could be a very real possibility, that it's much more of a supernatural, esoteric being that's just one of the many things that exists around us that we just haven't quite got our fingers on yet. And maybe, it does just sort of pop into our reality for a while and then pop back out. And it could be the same kind of thing as like a Mothman, or something like that. And I think that's it's a weird way of explaining why, like, you only see Loch Ness Monster once in a while, or these lake monsters, right? They come and they go because they're not always here.
Yeah.
I mean, on the other side of it, you could also argue that the Bigfoot population would be small if it was flesh and blood. It'd be very adept at hiding in its own natural environment, and the forests are vast, and they could just simply disappear if they want to, right? It's kind of one of your on the fence answers, because I'm just not 100% sure one way or the other, but I've experience things that lead me towards the supernatural path, and I've definitely also run into people who say it's definitely along the more physical path. So, and maybe it is both at the same time. When it's here, it's very solid, and then when but it can manipulate itself and go somewhere else.
Right on. And we mentioned the places of high strangeness, just these places like Skinwalker Ranch, the Meadow. I think there's Blind Frog Ranch, just other places that have been popping up that seem to have just concentrations of paranormal activity, UFO activity, even Bigfoots, and even, electromagnetic anomalies. People's equipment just stopped working. All kinds of a whole gamut of just high strange activity going on in these areas. And I wonder if it's just a high concentration of energy. Is it something underground? I wonder why these specific areas have this concentration of this stuff going on, enough to where, the government is studying these. I have in the Meadow, there's former intelligence officers as a paranormal team investigating that stuff, and it's not a disclosed area. You can't even find out exactly where that place is. So there's definitely some very high interest from high levels in these places.
Well, as one would expect, right? Because they're definitely going to want to figure out what it is, tap into it, and try to exploit it in some way. Basically, that's what they do, right? That's what they do. But we've had even like investigating residential places where suddenly fully charged cameras and batteries just die for no reason. You know what I mean? And very quickly. And within minutes, literally, right? Like you've just charged all your gear, you're ready to go in, and then stuff just starts dying on you left, right, and center. So I think there's definitely something that ties into the electromagnetic field and how this works. And I've even talked with other investigators who've been able to go to the same place, like Bacon's Castle down in the States, and they can go repeat like every year or twice a year and conduct the same sort of experiments. And when it comes, at least in that location, to like a residual haunting, they definitely feel that all the evidence they're collecting is pointing towards an Einstein-Rosen bridge. It's like a wormhole, right? Which could explain a gateway between our world and wherever this world is that they're coming from. So I think we're working on it. I think the science is there. I think eventually science itself will kind of get on board, because there are enough scientists who aren't part of the mainstream who want to look at these different things. I think it's going to take, everyone kind of coming together to figure it out, if we're ever going to figure it out, which I don't, part of me thinks we probably won't.
Right. Right.
It's so odd of a phenomenon.
No,
you just can't just do it.
Yeah, it is. I've told this kind of story a bunch of times, so I won't make it too long. But have you heard of the Meadow and some of the phenomenon going on in there?
I've heard of it. I'm not as aware of it as I am Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, Skinwalker Ranch gets the press.
This is a newer one, and they finally admitted it's in Alabama, but they won't say exactly where. And the lead investigator, Trey Hudson, I've had him on the show a couple of times. I actually got to hang out with him at a UFO conference a couple of years ago. And at this conference, he showed the most amazing video I've ever seen of his team going out to investigate an anomaly in a field. And this anomaly was like a 20-foot black cube that manifested in this field. And when his team went out to investigate it, they couldn't see anything. But when they got to the area of the cube, they disappeared. They were gone. You could see the infrared footage. He was showing this at the conference, the infrared footage of his team going there, and then all of a sudden, their little infrared bodies disappear. And what they report is a drop of temperature in like 10 degrees. They were getting hit by picker bushes that weren't supposed to be that weren't in that area at all. And they had to backtrack and find their way out of whatever they walked into. And then they pop out of the other side of this black cube, their infrared images. And it was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And I just wanted to get your take on, if you've ever heard of anything like that or seen anything like that.
There's I haven't, well, actually, wait, actually come to think of it. Tronquil Sanitarium here, which is an old mental institution up in Kamloops where I live. It was shut down in the 80s when they deinstitutionalized everything. And of course, it's now the urban legend spot, right? Everyone thinks it's haunted, blah, blah, blah. And I did my first couple of investigations there. But I can remember going into one of the old buildings. It was a hospital, because it was a whole city that's just been abandoned, right? Like a small little city. Going to the main hospital building, and we'd be inside, and there's even broken windows, right? And there was no sound coming in from the outside. Like, it was completely quiet, and you could go turn around and go out a door, and it was a spring day, and you could hear the birds chirping, a train was going by, like you could hear all this stuff. But when you'd go inside, it would be dead quiet. And that's the closest I've come to that kind of phenomena, where it's just like, outside loud, inside super quiet, even with broken windows. And usually with broken windows, you get outside noise, but there was nothing. I've heard of places. Paul Dino wrote a book called Beyond the Paranormal, where he describes going to a place, I think it was in New York State, where it's an old kind of abandoned village. But when you're there, you can almost, at certain times, you can hear like the carts and people talking and walking around and everything, but you can't see them, kind of stuff. So, and that's where he sort of started really getting into multiverse. Like there's these places where the veil, for lack of a better word, is thin, and you can kind of physically kind of be between the two worlds. And what you're describing at the Meadow there almost sounds like there's a way that you can literally pop in and out that way, which is why I lean towards multiverse theory as a way to possibly explain all this stuff, because people have reported experiences like that. And I've even had, in a minor way, stuff that's kind of similar to that, where I just can't, I don't know why we didn't hear outside noise inside a place where you could have heard it. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me. And it was very clear.
Yeah.
What was going on.
Man, it's amazing, some of that stuff. Tell us a little bit about your co-host of Hunting the Haunted. What is that about?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a show that Peter and I do where we take old or well-known and lesser-known cases of paranormal activity, and we kind of do a review of it. Like, we kind of tell the story of it, and then Peter, with his experience, chimes in from his experience of what could possibly have been going on, and then I kind of bring my own sort of newer knowledge to it. And at the end, we try to determine whether it was real or a hoax kind of thing. And so, we've touched on, the Amityville, the Enfield poltergeist, the great Amherst mystery up here in Canada, the true story of The Exorcist, the Conjuring house, right? Because that was a real house and that was a real case. And we just try to dissect it that way and present it in kind of an entertaining way, but also just bringing the facts and knowledge as we see it. And it's a fun show to do. Like, it's neat to kind of research these things, and then to hear Peter's input, because he's very skeptical and he's not afraid to share his opinion and stuff like that. And just sort of to talk about these things. So we talked about the Amityville horror, and I mean, we kind of lean towards hoax for that one, just because of what the information that came out after the fact.
Interesting.
And we have one thing that I have a problem with when it comes to these hauntings that you hear about that become popularized is when someone starts trying to make a bunch of money off of it.
Well, what
like
was
when the
the
book deal, the movie deal comes in, etc. Right? Like, that always makes me question the validity of an experience.
Yeah, what was the information that came out? Because I'm not sure if I'm familiar with what came out after the fact about the Amityville that may have debunked it.
The big thing that was a big debunker at the time was that the priest that was involved, that said he experienced, the get out and all this kind of stuff, basically said that he sat down with the Lutz family and they cooked it all up over a bottle of wine. And that, I think, for me, was the big torpedo in that. When one of the people that's a key player says that, you got to really question it. And then there's the one photo of the boy, like, kind of peering around a door. If you look at it, it just looks like where he is in the picture isn't right compared to where they say that the picture was taken. Like, it just seems like it was superimposed over something in the final film. So it just creates these questions. And there's been enough questions directed at the Lutz family in general, and especially George Lutz, about him not being a good character, that makes you just really wonder what happened. I mean, they bought a place that was too expensive. They're having money trouble, need to get out of this house. It's just some of it doesn't ring true. And we're not saying that it's not, but just from our outside looking in information, it just doesn't seem true. And other people have gone in since and had nothing happen. Mm-hmm. Like, absolutely nothing happened, right?
Yeah.
That being said, there's a new documentary coming out, I think, called Amityville: The Resurgence, that paranormal investigator named Sean Austin did. I haven't seen it yet, but where they went back and apparently there's been more activity. So I don't know. I got to watch this to find out. But when we sort of did our little analysis, we just lead more towards hoax than fact. And then the fact, they sold a really big book deal out of it. They got a movie deal out of it. They all made a bunch of money off of it.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, you gotta look at that stuff.
You got to look at that stuff, right, as a motivator. And that happens a lot with these big cases. It's a bit different with Enfield, where it was documented by a whole team. The family didn't really make a dime. They got a lot of publicity out of it. That, they lean more towards it being possible. But yeah.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to hauntings and maybe just what disturbances, poltergeists, different types of things that could occur that fall under the paranormal umbrella, One of them that I get the most kind of arguments about, I don't want to say arguments, but it is kind of when I have different paranormal investigators or people who are trying to portray different understandings of the paranormal and the entities that we're dealing with. Demonic entities, or what people understand as demons, is a big argument, and I think it's a misunderstanding a lot of times. And I'd just like to get your take on, what do you think demons are? Do you think that these entities can actually, be in places or haunt houses, or maybe even attach themselves to people? What do you think?
Well, it's like demon is very much more of a religious terminology, or very much, and a lot of what people are talking about as demons is driven by the Roman Catholic belief system, right? And I mean, and no disrespect to Roman Catholics, but I don't fall into that either. Like I don't fall into that kind of belief thing either. I think it could be a very narrow view of something. I would look at what people describe as a demon as being more just like a negative entity than anything else. And I kind of think that if it's a ghost thing, if you're a good person in life, you're going to be a good ghost. And if you're a bad person in life, you're going to be a bad ghost. You know what I mean? And I think that's leans more into that.
Yeah.
There have been definitely cases of people being possessed. Like, you've heard enough about it through variety of different spiritual belief systems. So I think there's something to that. Exorcism exists across the board in various different belief systems as well. So I think that sometimes if you come up against something that's really negative, that can have an impact on you. And I think that they can influence you. You know what I mean? Especially if you're kind of weak-willed or something like that, or you're just going through traumatic times. There's definitely, I've heard of people feeling like they're being nudged a certain way. They're already experiencing high stress. They've lost a loved one, and they feel that they've just sort of being pulled down a dark path. But I think it's dangerous to just classify it as a demon. I think and especially if outright, like I think, like Peter actually is an investigator for an exorcist out of Washington State. And a lot of the times you can kind of explain these experiences people are having away through seeing a psychologist and looking at it as a mental health issue first, or an addiction issue first, before jumping into something more spiritual. And I think people are too quick to jump on that bandwagon. With running the Paranormal Network, I get people reaching out and contacting me. And the one that really stands out was a woman reached out to me and said that her son had flatlined briefly after being struck in the head. And when they revived him, he came back different. Like, his personality had changed, and she was asking me, do you think he was possessed by something when he was down? And I'm like, and I respond like, I'm not qualified. I'm running a site, and I investigate ghosts and hauntings. B, if your son was dead, there's loss of oxygen to the brain. That's going to have an impact. So the first person you should be talking to is your doctor, and then a neurologist, before you come and talk to me about possible possession. And I think too many people look at that first, especially if they're very spiritual or very religious people. And so I think that is influencing a lot of what you're talking about, what people are explaining these days and what people are turning to first. I think I would look at that last. Right. in anything, even when it comes to a haunting. Because most hauntings can be explained away naturally too, right? Or it's just misperception, or it's people wanting to have this experience and misinterpreting things that are going on in their home. So you kind of got to rule out every other possibility when it comes to the paranormal first, before you look at anything as being paranormal. And then once you look at something as being paranormal, each individual paranormal event within the context of a haunting should be examined separately and skeptically, and to rule out everything else first. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
But
Do you think that a lot of what's considered hauntings may just be some kind of residual energy that just kind of keeps manifesting over and over again, and maybe not an actual intelligent consciousness that could maybe interact? I don't know if that's how you can tell a difference, maybe if you can interact with the phenomenon, or if it's just something that you see that kind of in a loop. What do you think?
Well, there's a couple different kinds. The two most common are residual haunting, which is what you're talking about, where it is something replaying in a loop. Every rainy, stormy night at 3:00 in the morning, footsteps are heard going down a hall or down a fire escape. And it just keeps repeating. The right circumstances are coming up to repeat it. You can't interact with it. It's just the same thing. It's like when people talk about the woman in white coming down, the staircase, and she starts at midnight, and by 12:05, she's down and she disappears. And it just keeps repeating. That's residual. Then there's intelligent hauntings, and these are the ones where you can interact with it. Like they respond to questions. You can ask them to open and close a door, and they will. The plates move, that kind of thing. Then there's also poltergeist, which is where plates are moving and disturbances and knocking on walls, etc. And you can kind of have intelligent and poltergeist. Like they can be hard to tell apart sometimes. And there have been cases where you've kind of had two different kinds of hauntings occurring in the same place at the same time. Not really sure why, but the residual is definitely something happened in that spot that was traumatic and it left some sort of imprint on it. That's also referred to as stone tape theory. And that's where a lot of the belief in the electromagnetic aspect comes in, because something bad happens. We're all made of energy. That energy for some reason gets trapped in that spot and replays like an old tape over and over and over again. Yeah, so right, those are the different types that we look at. And then people do consider like demonic hauntings, etc. As well, even though we don't look at it that way.
Yeah. Do you think that there is a great danger of an entity actually causing physical harm to somebody?
There's been cases where people have reported it, right? Like there are documented cases of like the scratchings that people talk about. I myself at Tranquille was pulled off my feet into a door by something. We were in a tunnel system, because up here in Canada we get a lot of snow sometimes, and so in order to move patients or supplies in the heavy winter months, they would build tunnels between the buildings. So we were down in the tunnel system looking around, and we kind of came out in what was called the laundry building, and we're deciding whether to go back to the car, like go climb up onto the main ground and walk across, go back through the tunnels. We decided the tunnel, so I turned around, just come through the door like a minute prior, 30 seconds, a minute prior. There's no airflow down there, so there's nothing that could really affect the door. I opened it, I got it kind of about halfway open, and something pulled back on that door with enough force. I'm 6'1", in my 190s. I was pulled into that door, and it was that much strength behind it. Man. Only time something like that's happened, it scared the shit out of me. Like I was terrified. I ran, like I was out of there. Yeah. So they can affect you physically, and there have been cases where people have been hurt, or at least touched, felt, scratched, knocked around a little bit, pulled to the floor.
Yeah.
So it can happen.
That's very interesting. Do you find that maybe the negative entities do respond to things like religious texts or prayer or things of that nature?
What I've sort of found is that it comes down more to the belief of the person having these experiences. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're Catholic and you think invoking the name of Jesus Christ is going to have an impact, it will. But also at the same time, if you're just someone who just puts their foot down, like, this is my house, I live here now, you are not welcome here, leave, that too will. If you are just believing it strongly enough and aren't afraid, it will work. Or you can even recommend someone, like, if you're okay with it being here and it's not bugging you, then just say to it, we live here, we don't mind you being here as long as you don't bug and interact with us. And quite often that they get a very positive response out of it in all these cases. Same with an exorcism. It might be a mental health issue, but if that person who is having this issue believes they're being possessed, I've heard of people conducting exorcisms because it becomes a placebo effect, right? Like, actually it's a mental health thing, but if you believe you're possessed, we do this exorcism, they've been quote unquote cured. Yes. Because it stops. So I think belief plays a huge part in all of this, really.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I had my own kind of personal contact experience through meditation, and it wasn't until I actually went out and started seeking it, and I think that's the case for a lot of people who have these experiences. Is belief is a big part of it, and that's very interesting. For the last few minutes we have, I want to talk a little bit about UFOs. You are narrator of the UFO show. What is this one about?
Well, it's literally what it sounds like. We take kind of the big UFO events and stories of kind of the past month, and we kind of talk about them, the ones that we find the most interesting. And we just sort of present what happened and kind of maybe a little bit of kind of commentary or editorializing, but not too much, right? And just make it, try to, show the clips and make it kind of entertaining for people. And we also have another one called UFO Incidents, where we go back and look at the big ones, like, the Roswells, the Rendlesham Forest. We got one on Betty and Barney Hill coming up, that kind of thing. So just really exploring this phenomenon, trying to present what facts and evidence there is and put it out there for the public. Again, anything we do at the Paranormal Network, it's more just, we want people to make up their own minds based on what we show them. But UFOs are, it's It's like that old, like Zoolander line, like so hot right now. People love UFOs. And I think because of the whole disclosure thing and all the press that came out around that and people talking about it more, like there's a variety of shows on Netflix and all these channels about UFOs right now. The one that J.J. Abrams executive produced, just called UFO, is really good. Like I really enjoyed that. And I like that they had a whole episode dedicated to the skepticism around it, where most of these shows don't. But they took the time to kind of explain, well, maybe it's actually this. And maybe all these people like the Luis Elizondos have an agenda, right? Like,
right.
Because they probably do. Like, people don't become that public just out of the kindness of their own heart. You know what I mean? Like there's something going on.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let's get you. I want to get your thoughts further into this because I've seen a major deception in the UFO community for a while. I mean, I've attended a few UFO conferences in the past years, and it's mainly great people. It's wonderful people, wonderful community. I had a great time at all of them, but there are some people that are in high-level positions or used to be in three-letter agencies that are attending these conferences, not only attending, but they're now presenting at these conferences because they all of a sudden had a change of heart about what they, did, or now their non-disclosure agreement's up and they just want to run out and tell everybody. But all of a sudden, a few of them have a Showtime series, an HBO series. They're in the big times now. They're, go and talk on the biggest talk shows out there. So some of these people are, I believe, being propped up there intentionally. There's a lot of people planted in this community to spread whatever kind of BS that's the mainstream narrative is putting out about UFOs. And why, I don't know, but it's very interesting. Are you seeing the same things?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting you bring that up because that episode of UFO I'm talking about touches exactly on that. Like, why would these sort of high-level people, and then they get book deals. Like, you're right. Like, it just, are they planted, right? To try to continue this misconception about what's going on, or on the other side of it, like how, again, going back to the Amityville thing, like you got a book deal, you got a TV show. So even if you're not planted, why are you just trying to profit off of this now? You know what I mean? Because you have a bit of a reputation as being someone who was in the field researching or studying it or covering it up. And now you're going to have a tell-all book because you can make a boatload of money off of it. And that I always have a problem with. I would love to make a boatload of money doing what I'm doing right now. You know what I mean? But that's not foremost in my mind. But I always question when someone does that and it happens that fast.
Yes.
Like, I mean, it's like within a year. I mean, I want to read Luis Elizondo's book. I'm curious. I'm going to buy it. I'm going to contribute to that. But it happened so fast after he stepped out of government and joined the Two to the Stars Foundation, which I think he's now since left even. Like, I mean, those guys I think have kind of fallen apart, right? Yeah. So what was that about to happen so quick and then go up and then fall? It raises questions, and I think it drives the conspiracy theories that go on around this, for better or for worse.
It's the way they've been doing it has been strange to me also. They'll throw it out there and then kind of reel it back in. Nah, it could be swamp gas, could be the Russians, but maybe it's UFOs, and then they keep reeling it back and putting it like at the end of the last year, they have a new Pentagon department to investigate UAPs, how many of these departments are you going to have that are just going to put out nonsense reports, So I don't know what trail they're leading us on, but what do you think? What do you think is the bigger picture with this? Because I think it's something way more than we could ever understand. I think it's more metaphysical than anything. I think it's possibly even a spiritual phenomenon. I don't know if these guys are come and visit us across the galaxy in tin cans, or whether, like we said earlier, whether they're right here at all times, maybe popping in and out of our reality. But there's definitely something going on, a grand intelligence of some sort, or maybe multiple intelligences that are all connected with all of this stuff that we've been talking about. I don't know. What do you think about this whole alien UFO thing?
There's been reports of UFOs dating, like even in the Bible. Right. Like, and back in like Sumerian times, like, there's a big, strong belief that the Mayans and the Egyptians were helped. The Egyptians talked about chariots of the gods coming from the skies to help them out. I think it's been around since the beginning, like we talked about earlier. Be they from outer space or some other dimension, I think they've been with us all along. And I think they've been interacting with us all along. And I think there's even been talks of like Eisenhower negotiating with aliens, you know what I mean? Like with aliens, and even Obama, like, like, I mean, it's been happening. We had a major player in the Canadian military talk about it, believing in it and investigating. I think it's very common. I think the fact that the government is not saying anything is kind of laughable, because I think they've known, and I think they've been interacting with it a long time. The craziest theory I ever heard. I just finished reading a book by Nick Redfern called Final Events. And it's all about the Collins elite. I don't know how much about that, but it was a government body that looked at the possibility that these were demons, coming here to eat our souls and stuff like that. I find that to be that's beyond woo to me. That's way out there and taking a very, very Catholic belief and imposing it on this event. But somebody did look into that. and I think there's got to be a reason why. Even if I think it's kind of BS, there's got to be a reason why someone would take that approach to it, which makes me think it's far more metaphysical.
Yeah, and even recently, some of the senior members of the Pentagon and Congress were saying, yeah, this is a demonic phenomenon. You're not supposed to be messing with that. And I think it does go back to what you were just saying about the Collins elite and that whole thing, which is insane. But, even if it is, they're saying it's demons, don't be messing with it. Well, wouldn't you want to kind of look into if there's demons flying around in the sky? Maybe we should investigate. I don't know, or just leave them there. Just let them fly. I don't know.
Well, what was most interesting? It is fascinating because when you look at that, like, then it comes down to how it does touch on what we talked about before about how these things present themselves to us.
Yeah.
Right? Like it does, because it for the longest times it was chariots in the sky, and then it was like the airship in the Victorian era, and now they look like our stealth fighters. Like it's almost like they present themselves in a way that we will best comprehend whatever they are. It's like the Indrid Colds and the Men in Black, where they look like people, but there's just something a bit wrong. You know what I mean? A bit wrong with them.
Yes. Do you think?
Yeah, I think it ties into that.
You think that we have very, secret factions beyond three-letter agencies? What these agencies I'm talking about that are not to be named, that actually know a lot more about what's going on and maybe be part of these black projects like you hear about, secret space program, things of this nature. Do you think that those agencies actually exist and maybe know a lot more?
Oh, I'm sure they do. I mean, they would have to, right? And there's stuff that we will never, as a public, I think would be very hard pressed to ever find out about. But you just hear of these events, even like in the book Hunt for the Skinwalker, they make mention of another kind of ranch where things were going on, and they just it just seemed more like it was the government messing with people just to try these experiments on like infrasound and how it affects people, in terms of changing perception of what they're seeing and experiencing. Like they hear about these really out there black ops that's happening. And so I'm sure there's bodies of the government, like beyond a Project Blue Book or anything like that, right? Which, I mean, to touch on the new agency, that's just basically Project Blue Book continued. And I think they've had these groups going around forever. So yeah, I think there's definitely groups within every level of government, I think in every country, that know a lot more about this stuff than they're letting out. And I'm sure they have their reasons why they don't want people to know. And I think if we suddenly found out about all this stuff, people would lose their minds.
Yeah, you think so? You think that most people haven't been kind of conditioned over the past few years enough to kind of be ready for, not saying an invasion, but just to know that something else exists out there?
Oh, I'm sure. Like, I mean, there's people like you and I who are very open to the concept, but there's people that don't want to talk about it. They don't believe in it. And I think their fuzzy little heads would explode if suddenly, here it is. You know what I mean? Like I think people would lose their mind. I think people would just panic. It would be like the beginning of the pandemic 100 times worse. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that you're right about that. There's a lot of people that aren't ready for this stuff. But, I think that over the past few years, there are a lot more people open to this. And I'm encouraged to see, people looking into hidden things more. And I hope that continues. And, Jason, that was awesome. You're actually you're working on a new book, right?
We finished. We have the second book came out in October. Mm-hmm. Which is I Want to Believe, an Investigator's Archive, which is a collection of just accounts from different paranormal investigators, everyone from like the Paul Bradfords, who's on Ghost Hunters International, to people that Peter and I have worked with. And we're working on a new one, which is, it's funny because it's tying a lot in ways what we're talking about, which is about near-death experiences.
Oh, nice.
And all about that. And it's interesting how, as I'm going through this, it sounds like a lot of encounters people have in terms of like also alien abduction theory and that kind of thing, right? It's very fascinating subject matter to be writing about. In fact, I was just doing some writing before I came on here. So it's a great, and we're hoping to have it out before the end of the year.
Awesome.
So that's our upcoming book. Yeah.
Well, Jason, that was amazing. We'll definitely have to do this again soon. Let the audience know where they can find all your stuff, YouTube, website, social media, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah. Well, there's the Paranormal Network, which is on YouTube, and it's the one with that's the black box with the white PN in it. We have a Facebook page, which you can just put in like at Paranormal Headquarters, and you'll find the Paranormal Network on Facebook. And that's where you can find like We Want to Believe, etc. We Want to Believe has its own Facebook page. We Want to Believe the series. And then the books are through Beyond the Fray Publishing. So you can find them off of beyondthefray.com. Plus they're available like on Amazon all over the world and Barnes and Noble.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. That was excellent. And we'll definitely be talking to you again soon in the future.
Anytime, my friend, anytime.
Awesome. Well, until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening. And I think we'll be talking again later tonight. So we'll see you then.